Hi, Caroline. Whoever's there. Hi, it's Gayl.
Hi, Gayl. This is Naomi. How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good. How was your session?
Huh?
How was the webinar you just came from?
Oh, it was wonderful. It was just the total opposite of what I'm about to do. She just fired ideas at us for, the full time. But so now I'm going to step back and say, how are we thinking about this stuff, this whole virtual school thing? So
No.
it was a good inspiration.
Oh, good.
I would like to, how have you been starting these? Have you been starting these with seeing all the participants or with the Google slide thing up? I want to share my screen and see if it's working okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, looks like it is. You got all kinds of garbage here.
Yes, it looks perfect.
Okay, let's do this and make sure that the captioning is working. It is. Okay. So I think what I'd like to do is just see faces if I can when they come in. Is that all right?
Yeah, perfect.
All righty. Then we're set. I signed in right away because I want to make sure I had it right, but I think that's all I need. So if you need to do anything else, let me know.
No, I think we are good.
Okay.
And have a good session.
Thank you.
It's one of those words.
Yeah. Yes. I'm gonna stop my video and go make sure my water bottle's full, but I'll be right back.
Okay. Hi, Jamie. This is Naomi. How you doing? No, I can't hear it. Oh, wait. I think it's on my side. Okay, try saying something now. Not yet. Can you say something else?
Hi, Naomi. Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay. Not sure what was going on there. That was a little strange.
It was probably me.
As long as we're up and running, that's okay.
Yes. Yes. How's things going?
Things are going well. How about you?
Things are going good. Are you missing Temple?
somewhat. I don't miss the commute, so
That's true.
I'm only like 12 minutes away from my job now, so I can't complain at all.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, me too. So I can't complain. Sounds good. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, no problem. No problem. So there's a lot of good content going on today.
Yeah, it turned out to be pretty good. We should get together and do something.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm hanging around here.
Sounds good. I mean, we should collaborate with assistive technology for Jersey somehow, with colleges, get higher ed more involved.
Yeah, it's a tough one. We were doing some things before, and it's an ever developing field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you involved with NJ Ahead?
I'm on their listserv. I am on their listserv.
Okay.
So I do send stuff out to them, but not really involved. But yeah.
It's a good way to try to get involved with the higher ed institutions, because they are meeting actually once a month now. They're doing a lot more remote meetings.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, because we need to be reaching out to higher ed a lot more than we do. And it looks about that time.
I wanted to make sure I set my timer because I'm famous for looking past things.
That's okay. You're the last section, so you could go longer. No one's trying to get into the room anymore.
Oh, actually, I just got a text from someone. It says that your mic is live in the session, so we're being broadcasted. Hi, everybody. I don't know what session that is.
Our section, but that's okay. We're not saying much.
So this is Gayl. I just want to make sure I'm in the right session. Am I?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I am the presenter for this one.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you see the captions coming up on the screen as well?
Yes. Yes. The captions look great. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the captions look really good.
Okay, good.
Hi, everybody. This is Gayl. I'm assuming that I'm assuming that we'll get a go-ahead to get started. So I was waiting for that. Somebody in the chat box just said, where do I live? It really is pretty here, and it is Oregon, but what you have to see is at my back window, I'm in the fire zone for the Oregon fires, and we're having a whole lot of smoke here. So I've been staying inside, and I welcome the chance to come to New Jersey. I just got a chat box message that it's okay to go ahead and start. So welcome. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of this very busy day. I've enjoyed the sessions that I've had a chance to attend today, and I didn't start with the very first one this morning because of the 3-hour time difference, but I'm really glad to be with you this afternoon. My title for today is Lessons Learned Recently, and Where Do We Go From Here? I wanted to tell you a little bit of history of this presentation because it has morphed significantly since the first time I did it, which was before the shutdown. So lessons learned recently, where do we go from here? I was asked to do a keynote at an assistive technology conference not too long ago. And the reason that they asked me to do it was because I've been around the field of assistive technology for a very long time. And I was kind of the historian for the conference. But what happened last March for us has really made me take a step back and think even more deeply about where do we go from here in terms of the virus and the shutdown and the things that we are learning that may be helpful to us even when we're all back in school and together again. So that's kind of the overview of what we're going to do today. And it's very much a philosophical kind of presentation. I like to do these every once in a while just because I think it helps us think about the big picture of what we're doing. And I believed even before the virus and the shutdowns that we were in a time of significant change in our assistive technology services, just because of all the ways the world was changing. So now I know we're in a time of significant change. We've all experienced all kinds of changes, but I want to walk us through a little bit of our past, present, and future. This is an assistive technology timeline that I found online, and it's a summary of the kind of the whole history of how we began to develop services for children with disabilities over time. The very first act that even mentioned students with disabilities was, you'll see, in 1965 with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. In 1986 was the first iteration of what we now call IDEA. And in 1988, I was hired as the coordinator for the Oregon Technology Access Program. So I've been working in the field of assistive technology since 1988, and those are my credentials as a historian. I thought it would be fun to show you what technology looked like in 1988. So this is a flyer from Apple Computer from 1988. I was cleaning out a box I had that was called Antiques, and I found this price list and description of an Apple II computer, Apple IIe computer. And that was the first computer that I had in my classroom. You can see in the picture down here that we didn't have any kind of a disk drive in those days. We actually went to Radio Shack and purchased cassette tapes and cassette tape recorders. And that's how we saved our programming and our work. I also wanted to point out, just because it's fun to know, that if you look at the right over here, I know it's a little hard to read, but the price list for this computer, the Apple IIe computer in 1988, it had 48 kilobytes of memory, which was enormous in those days, and it cost $2,345. So even our there's nothing these days that I know that you can buy that has 248 kilobytes in it, but that was a big deal. So we've come a very long way in terms of technology, but also we've come a very long way in how we think about our assistive technology programs. One of the founding principles in 1988 of the Oregon Technology Access Program was this idea of enabling and empowering school districts and parents of children with disabilities and teachers of children with disabilities to create their own assistive technology systems, to develop their ideas about how to deliver assistive technology services to their students. And I ran across this idea originally in this book called Enabling and Empowering Families from Carl Dunst. We adopted this idea that if we wanted to enable families and schools to do good assistive technology work, there would probably never be enough specialists to help that come to fruition, but we could create opportunities for the folks that we serve to become competent in the area of assistive technology and provide opportunities for them to practice. The idea of empowerment is just a tiny bit different, and it talks about this having a sense of control and efficacy resulting from having those enabling opportunities. So feeling like you've got this, you can do assistive technology. One of the things that really strikes me about these two concepts is that we have used them as a vision for the Oregon Technology Access Program from the beginning, and they still hold true today, even though we're on our fourth coordinator in that program. I'm actually a consultant to OTAP and many other programs around the country right now. But those ideas of enabling and empowering still hold true today. One of the ways I've been thinking about things lately comes from the work that I've done with Denise DeCoste in the changing role of AT teams. And I saw a couple people on the list that I think may actually have been participants in that class or in one of the workshops that we've been doing at the ATIA conference for several years now. I gave you this link to the NATE network because you'll see down here in the upcoming AT Teams class events, that's where we post our upcoming classes and the syllabus and registration materials for those classes. And our next one, if you're interested, will be held in January. Another thing I wanted to tell you about, and this came in today, I'm very excited about this brand new publication, which is a virtual book that's available from Emerald Insight, which is an Australian company. And it's a book called Assistive Technology to Support Inclusive Education. In this book, there are, I think, about 15 chapters. There's a chapter on emerging trends. There's a chapter by Joy Zabala about the SET framework, which we're very excited to see. And there's also a chapter that I wrote about a year ago about remote assistive technology services. And it reviews the literature and the theoretical basis for remote assistive technology services, But one of the things that's really striking to me about this chapter is, as I reviewed it when the book came out, I realized that over a year ago, I was trying to convince people to try remote assistive technology services. They weren't doing very many things with this remote assistive technology services. And even the idea of a remote consultation or remote office hours was innovative. So it's in this book chapter. There are some other ideas in this chapter that I think might be useful to you if you're interested in taking a look at it, but it was just released, so I'm pretty sure that you haven't seen it yet. I want to open the chat. Okay, I just want to make sure there's nothing in the chat that I needed to know about. So what I want to do next is talk about how those two things, the changing role of AT Teams ideas and the remote assistive technology services ideas, have come together to help us develop ideas and strategies for empowering teachers and parents and families and our students with disabilities to make better use of their assistive technology. One of the things about empowerment is that it starts with a belief that people have most of the competencies that they will need in order to do a job, or at least it's possible for them to acquire those competencies. So assuming that even though families may be stressed right now and having some financial insecurities and all the terrible things that are actually happening to people, the families of our students with disabilities also can develop the skills that they might need in order to help us as we provide virtual assistive technology services to their children. I just heard a wonderful presentation from Kelly in the last session where she talked about all the ways that you can include new learning in a family's home without ever providing new materials or even using an online system to do your work. So we have added the idea of assistive technology to that here, but I think that presentation particularly exemplified the fact that we are assuming that our families are capable and can feel empowered to work with us as we provide assistive technology for services for their kids. When we see that not going well, the assumption in an empowerment model is that the people that we're trying to work with and provide support to don't have enough information. So it's up to us to make sure they have the information they need in order to facilitate that success. Oh dear. There. In 1988, here's what things looked like. And I put the picture up there in the corner. That's what I looked like in 1988, which makes me feel very old at the moment. But in 1988, we tended to have separate IEP goals for every discipline. We'd go have an IEP meeting, we'd go around the room, and we'd say, okay, I'm the OT, my goals for this student are this. I'm the SLP, my goals for this student are this. And when I was called upon in those IEP meetings to talk, I said, I'm the assistive technology specialist, and my goals for this student are this. We had a lot of pull-out services. We'd pull kids out and teach them specific skills and then send them back to the classroom with the assumption that they would be able to generalize those skills in new environments. There weren't very many assistive technology devices, and you just saw an example of what kinds of costs were involved with those devices when we looked at the old Apple IIe price list. There was some conversation about universal design, but not as much conversation about universal design for learning. And it was a very visionary idea. We hoped that someday we would be able to get to that kind of idea. And we also believe that specialized instruction done in isolated settings would eliminate barriers. So a lot has changed. When we talk about what change means to us, usually it means that we're standing in the present and we're looking back at what happened before to see how we can make things improve. So how did my professional development activities go 2 years ago? How have they gone for the last 2 years? And what can I do to make them better? That's pretty much a definition of determining the changes that we need to make. Here are some of the changes we had made by January of 2020. So one of them that I've been heavily involved in was the quality indicators for assistive technology. If you aren't familiar with the quiet areas, there are 8 areas where we talked about what it looks like to provide high quality assistive technology services, even though we may have very different models for doing that. So for instance, in AT assessment, one of the quality indicators is that it's a team approach. And another of the quality indicators is that some of the assessment, at least, is done in the student's customary environment. Each of these areas has between 5 and 7 descriptors of the important elements of what high quality assistive technology services should look like. And if you want to take a look at those, if you're not familiar with Quiet, I want to suggest that you go to the Quiet website, which is quiet.org, QIAT, no U in there, and take a look at these because they have become very useful tools for thousands of people around the world. I think that they also hold true for the work that we're doing now with virtual and blended assistive technology services as a result of the school shutdowns. Another thing we've learned since 1988 was about implementation. And what we learned was that implementation of assistive technology really has to involve that element of empowerment that I began to talk about at the beginning of this session. We used to think that if we told them about the technology and we gave them training, whoever they are, we gave them training in how it could be used and maybe some examples of how it could be used, they would know how to do it. But much of the issues, many of the issues that we run across these days in terms of assistive technology before the school shutdown in our traditional school services had to do with, we did good assessments, we selected good assistive technology for the student, we made a plan, we included it in the IEP, but implementation is still the place where things were falling down the most often. So what we've learned over time and from research on general professional development is that if we provide people with the research about something, the theory about something, if we show them how to use it and give them time to practice how to use it, they still won't be able to apply it without coaching and mentoring. So this is a graph from a study by Joyce and Showers, which is it's in your references. And what you see here is this is the research, this is the theory and demonstration. This is even when you get time to practice, people remember a lot, that's that yellow line. but it isn't until they get coaching and mentoring that they begin to be able to apply it on a daily basis and a regular basis. One more thing we've learned about professional development comes from a study called the Mirage Report, which was done by the New Teacher Project about 5 years ago. What they did was research on what it takes to help teachers improve. And there were many aspects to this study. It was quite well done. But their conclusion is that while it's understandable and well-intentioned, layering on more and more and more support is not the solution to helping teachers improve. Instead, we believe that school systems need to make a more fundamental shift in mindset and define helping teachers improve, not just in terms of providing them with discrete experiences, but with information, conditions, and a culture that facilitate growth and normalize continuous improvement. This is a study that you can find online, and it's quite extensive about the different ways they did the research and their conclusions. But it has made a big difference to me in my practice, and especially in my view of assistive technology leadership, because one of the things that became evident through this study is that if school districts don't provide specific aspects of leadership, you don't see changes in teacher behavior. And we're going to talk about that pretty much in just a minute. So that's all I'm going to say about it right now, except to know that this Mirage Report did change and is changing how we see general education practice as well as our special education and assistive technology practice. Another thing that's changed over the last bunch of years is our view of disability. Our initial, when I began to work in assistive technology, our initial view of disability was the ICD-9 codes. That's a medical system. For those of you who are related service providers, you'll be familiar with it, and you've probably used it as you bill for your services, whether they're assistive technology, OT, PT, or speech. In 2007, though, the World Health Organization developed the International Classification of Function for Children and Youth. There is also an International Classification of Function for Adults, which was the original version. But it's referred to as the ICF-CY, Children and Youth. And that view of disability is very different from the view of disability exemplified in the ICD-9 code. So we moved from a description of all the things that could be wrong, that people are lacking in the ICD-9 codes, to a view of disability that really is much more culturally appropriate in the International Classification of Function. The codes and the descriptions of disability in that document refer to the things that a person can do in their daily life. So rather than in the ICD-9 codes, you might have a code about contractures in a wrist or hand. In the ICF-CY codes, you have a vision of whether or not the person can do a functional task, whether they can pick something up, whether they can reach, whether they can point. So these codes have been adopted by, I believe, every professional organization for related service providers, at least at some level. And they really have informed our practice in terms of whether or not a disability keeps a person from doing something that they need to do. If you've done any cross-cultural work, worked in other countries or other places where the environment is significantly different, one of the things you may know is that disabilities are considered very differently in different cultures. I did some work in Vietnam a few years ago where we were working with a student who was hearing impaired, and that was the disability that had been identified by his family and his school. But this student also couldn't walk. He had spina bifida and he was unable to walk to school. So his brother carried him. And when we talked to them about a solution to this problem, the family and the school told us that they really didn't see his inability to walk as a disability, or at least it wasn't a very impactful disability, but his hearing impairment was very significant because they didn't have a way to help him get information from sound, but they did have a way to get him to school. So that's kind of a description, a story about the ICD-9 codes and how they might be used to help us think about assistive technology, because the things that prevent your function, international classification of function, are the things where assistive technology might be most welcome and best used. So another change, a relatively recent change. For many years, we've had the rule in special education called the Raleigh Standard, which was a Supreme Court decision quite a number of years ago, where the Supreme Court said schools have to provide adequate, appropriate benefit to a student, but they don't have to provide the Cadillac. So I put in a picture of the Cadillac version of something and the Volkswagen version of something, because that's often how it's referred to where I live. But in a new Supreme Court ruling just a year and a half ago called Andrew and versus Douglas County, the court said we haven't really ever defined educational benefit, sufficient educational benefit. And so they redefined it as benefit to enable the child to make progress in light of the child's circumstances. So it's no longer acceptable to do very similar programs over and over again for years without seeing some benefit in the child's circumstances. And I recognize that there may be children who are significantly impacted whose benefits will be very small, but it also has caused us to think as a field more clearly about how do we measure tiny increments in change for our students with the most significant intellectual disabilities, the most significant communication disabilities, and to really focus on how do we know that this program we've developed will enable the child to make progress in light of their circumstances. So that's been another change since 1988. As a part of the changing rules for AT Teams work that Denise DeCosta and I have done, and also as a part of many other changes in assistive technology programs, we've had begun in the last 2 or 3 years to build a focus on capacity building. And one of the workshops I've been doing a fair amount lately is what does it mean to build capacity? So here's a definition of capacity building in general. Much of the work that's available on capacity building is in the area of nonprofits, because there are many nonprofits who are charged with helping specific agencies or specific groups build their own capacity. So this is the definition that's kind of most common. Capacity building is whatever is needed to bring an agency to the next level of operational, programmatic, financial, or organizational maturity so it may more effectively and efficiently advance its mission into the future. That definition is full of ideas that we could be talking about for way more than the rest of the time we have today. But I wanted to give it to you because it's really important that the focus on capacity building begin with an idea of what our mission is in terms of how we're going to do things and how we'd like to move forward into the future. As we've talked about capacity building and the changing roles of HE Teams classes, these are the topics that we were using. We started doing this workshop in 2014, so we've done it for about 6 years now. Can be a online class or a 2-day workshop. But these are the topics that we were working with. So we're talking about revisioning what our services should be by looking at what our real mission is. We've talked about differentiating, not providing exactly the same thing to every group in exactly the same way, but identifying how we can provide services that best meet the needs of the people that we support. We've talked about administrative support and how crucial that is. We talked about outreach, connecting with other programs and other teams. We talked about remote services as a recommended item for helping us to implement our mission and vision, and also to save time and be more effective in terms of immediate response to people's needs. We talked about developing on-demand supports, and we talked about documentation. So those were things that have been going on since 2014 that many of us have been thinking about and expanding upon until the changes started to happen. Last March, the world flipped for us, for all of us in one way or another. But for those of us who were trying to provide assistive technology services, almost everything that we did or had intended to do had a new twist to it. I've heard many people talk about the pivot that we made in March, where we were headed one direction, we turned 90 degrees and we're headed off in a new direction. So because I was thinking a lot about capacity building, one of the questions that really arose during that pivot time was capacity to do what? Many of us who provided assistive technology services had to stop and think about what it was we had been doing, what were the essential elements of what we had been doing, and define what exactly it was that we needed to be able to do when we were talking about both virtual and face-to-face schools, when we were talking about all sorts and kinds of changes in a world where everybody else was also pivoting at the same time. So we've had a bunch of months to think about that and what our roles are. I'm hoping that as we go through the rest of this presentation, that you will either unmute yourself and provide your ideas and good ideas that you've had by telling us about them, or type your ideas into the chat box, because I think one of the most valuable things that we can do right now is to share those ideas and share those information. The thing that I want to focus on today is how we think about our systems. Much of the work that I have done is about systems, not direct services to kids, but hopefully you've had a chance to do multiple sessions today where people are giving you really good ideas about services to children, services to family, and how to use the accessible technologies that we have to improve our current assistive technology service system. So I promised in the description that we would have lots of examples, and this gets into the example part of the presentation. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between change and transformation. The definition of change really is looking at the past and identifying small problems that happened in the past, and in the present, looking for ways to improve those small problems, get rid of those small problems, adapt to the issues that we experienced in the past. Transformation is standing in the present and looking toward the future and saying, if it were really good 3 years from now, what would it look like? Many people are talking about when we get back to normal, and a friend of mine keeps saying, I hope we never go back to normal. I hope that we learn from these experiences, take advantage of the unanticipated outcomes that we're seeing that are valuable to our students, and that we transform our services rather than going back to old ways of doing things. So the examples I've tried to provide to you for the rest of the day are about those kinds of things. And I just realized, can somebody tell me, I'm confused about what time I'm supposed to end. If you type it in the chat box, I'd appreciate it. Anyway, there's my message. Thank you. Okay, I was afraid of that. So let's go through each of these areas that we've talked about. We've talked about remote, and I'm curious what kinds of things you are calling even your remote services these days. I call it remote because I've been doing it for a long time, but I know that blended and virtual are other aspects of that. I particularly wanted to talk to you today about, in this list of ideas, I wanted to talk to you about an idea that I really ran across. So I'm going to skip through some of this because I realized I'm running out of time, and I don't want to do that to you. We're seeing districts really do some revisioning, thinking about how they can do things differently than they've ever done them before. One of the ways that we're seeing a lot of change is direct instruction for students in groups about how to do virtual learning. And the more you read about how students are doing virtual learning, the more you hear teachers saying, we need to teach them how. We needed to teach our teachers how, but we also needed to teach our students how. So the big idea that I want to leave you with today is that this transformation we're looking for requires a great deal of collaboration and a great deal of leadership. Penny Reed and I wrote a book through Cast Publishing called Leading the Way to Excellence in AT Services. And one of the changes that we really recommend is much more communication with your administrators. What we've been seeing over time is that the districts that are most successful with virtual learning and virtual activities and online or blended schools are the ones that have very specific guidance to their staff. So I wanted to give you an example of a project that it has been doing that. This is a project out of Nova Scotia, the South Shore Regional Center for Education. Barbara Welsford and Anita Kingdom invited me to this project and allowed me to share just a little bit about what they're doing. But what I wanted to say was they have done a marvelous job of developing a plan for their traditional learning services, their dual learning environments, and their virtual learning environments. This is a slide from a PowerPoint that they use with their staff. So if you look at the colors, the traditional learning environment, they realized that even if they went back to a traditional learning environment, they needed to do things differently because of sanitation and program changes, and their staff is not allowed into schools because the schools are using a cohort model for their face-to-face services. So they've had to develop an idea about how they provide their assistive technology services in a traditional school setting when they can't be there. So again, a very big change to remote services. They've also had to talk about how they will pivot back and forth in dual learning environments, and also how they will provide their assistive technology services in more traditional learning environment, more virtual learning environments. Another aspect of administrative support that's been really critical, and it's been very evident that the more specific support you can provide, the more successful the district will be, is specifics about assistive technology service delivery adjustment in terms of professional development. So districts are providing, this is an example of a school district in California where they have provided specific expectations for every single staff person, including instructional assistants and people like that. This is in the Google folder that I've provided you for this session. But you can see the entire document. Management is another aspect of assistive technology service division. It's provision. And we need new and different operating guidelines for our assistive technology services because of this need to provide entirely new systems. So we have to define what we do, how we do it, who we do it with, and the things that we as assistive technology specialists don't do. Management also includes access to the technology and how we handle the technology. So many of you spend a lot of time there. Program development is another aspect of administrative support where we have needed very specific guidelines. This is a document that's in the Google folder that I provided for you that is very specific from the state of Oregon about what it means to do virtual schools and what the responsibilities for virtual schools are. But this second document is also in the folder, and it is specific to services for students at risk and students with disabilities. And you can see that there's a great deal about some of the many questions that you may have about child find and things like this as you move forward through this guide. We've had, this is a brand new presentation for me, and frankly, I have more material than I can cover in the time allotted. So what I'm gonna do is, this is in, or will be in the Google folder for this presentation, where we'll talk about outreach and students as partners, technology baby steps, on-demand resources, and some of the unanticipated outcomes of having this requirement to do virtual schools. One of the things we're seeing in many students is that they're beginning to be able to follow their own schedules, use timers and calendars independently, things like that. So I think where we go from here is that we are needing and we are seeing more increased consistency in the definition of our services, more awareness of the technology features that are available, and the awareness of the need for connectivity for everybody. I think we're going to see a lot in the next few months about how people are learning from this experience of needing to do online services. I wanted to give you two resources that are also in the Google folder. One is thinking about capacity building. So this is a worksheet that I use in the capacity building workshops that I do, and it just helps you answer the questions that are here in the text. What are this organization's most pressing capacity building needs? Why is this the right time to work on those specific needs? And what's going well and what needs improvement? So that's just a worksheet that guides you a little bit through having a discussion like that. And as you're rebuilding your model, I want to encourage you to do some capacity building ideas. The other worksheet that came from a different workshop that I do is a worksheet on, it says capacity building, it's remote no, that is it. Wait a minute. There's the remote services planning worksheet. This is a great tool that people are using all over the country to determine a specific remote service that they want to provide. And it walks you through all the different things that you might consider as you're providing assistive technology services. I'm going to end with this slide, and I apologize for going a little bit over. This is a story about change. It's from Gayl, and who is most known for his developmental work. But what he says is that when change happens, things are going along pretty smoothly and everything gets thrown into chaos. And if we haven't had that kind of time, I don't know what kind of time we've had. We then go through this crazy trail to inwardize and figure out what is going wrong and what is going right. And then we begin to climb back up the mountain to fitting things together, except one of the stages that I think is important here is Gayl talks about neurotic fitting together. As we begin to fit things together, we may need to redefine and reconnect with people who are participating in the change because we don't all make the same meaning out of the change. And then hopefully in the near future, we will hit a smooth phase. I want to thank you for bearing with me. I apologize. I put too much in it, and I know exactly which sections to cut out of this presentation. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I hope there's been something here that was useful for you as you begin to think about where do we go from here. So I'm done. I'd be happy to have conversations or take questions. And I appreciate those of you who are kind and say thank you and have been patient with me. It was a treat to be in New Jersey. Thanks, Lori. I'm trying to stay safe. So Elizabeth, I want to know if you remember 1988.